Hey, thanks for tuning in. In this video, I'm going to talk about New Testament prophecies ripped out of context. So I'm pretty sure that we can all agree that we want to consider things in context. That if we want to give an honest interpretation of Scripture, that we would want to consider the verses that surround the verse in question. That we would not just look at a verse or half a verse or something like that and say, let's just focus on this, let's not pay attention to what's going on around it, and if we just focus on this, we can make it say what we want it to say. We can make it support our previous beliefs. Now, obviously doing something like that, that would not be an honest evaluation of the text. I'm pretty sure all of us can agree on that. So instead, we want to consider context. And also, depending upon our personal background, for a lot of us, the way that we are familiar with these passages in the Old Testament, these passages that are referenced in the New Testament, the way that we know about them, at least from the beginning, is through the New Testament. That maybe we were reading the New Testament or someone was talking about it, and then it says, thus was fulfilled what the prophet said in Jeremiah or wherever the case is. And so we see the little footnote and it says, oh, okay, that's in Jeremiah 31. And so we open up Jeremiah 31 and we see, oh, okay, well, that passage that was quoted, it's there more or less. So I guess that's what it's talking about. I guess it is referencing that. That for a lot of us, the way that we first came to know about these passages is through the New Testament and in the context of the beliefs of the New Testament and the teachings of the New Testament. And one of the problems that we get into is that the New Testament does not always take prophecies in context. It does not always reference things in that way with the surrounding verses being accounted for. And there are several examples of this, but I'm going to focus on two because I think these two are some of the easier ones to see and maybe the easier ones to accept. And these are both in Matthew chapter 2. The first one, Matthew 2:15 says, "And was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of the land of Pharaoh have I called my son." So this is talking about how they escaped from Herod and waited until he had died, and then came back. So out of the land of Pharaoh have I called my son. This is a quote from Hosea 11. Which says, "When Israel was a child, then I loved him, and called my son out of the land of Pharaoh. As they called them, so they went from them. They sacrificed and burned incense to graven images. I taught Ephraim also to go, taking them by their arms, but they knew not that I healed them." So what is going on in Hosea 11? Who is the child? Who is the son that was called out? It was Israel. It was the Exodus. And they went forth. And then the people were calling to them. And they sacrificed. And they burned incense to graven images. Did the Messiah burn incense to graven images? Is this talking about what Matthew says it's talking about if we consider the context? And also let's consider Matthew 2:16 through 18. "Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceedingly wroth, and sent forth, and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. So the idea is that the children were slain in Bethlehem, and that this was a fulfillment of Jeremiah 31:15, that in Ramah was there a voice heard, Rachel weeping for her children, because they are not. So something we should consider is, who is Rachel? Rachel, of course, was the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, and the grandmother of Ephraim and Manasseh. She was not the mother of Judah. And what do the following verses in Jeremiah 31 say? In answer to Rachel weeping for her children, it says, Thus saith the Lord, refrain thy voice from weeping, and thine eyes from tears, for thy work shall be rewarded, saith the Lord, and they shall come again from the land of the enemy. And there is hope in thine end, saith the Lord, that thy children shall come again to their own border. I have surely heard Ephraim bemoaning himself thus, Thou hast chastised me, and I was chastised, as a bullock unaccustomed to the yoke. Turn thou me, and I shall be turned. Set thine heart toward the highway, even the way which thou wentest. Turn again, O Virgin of Israel, turn again to these thy cities. Jeremiah 31 is actually talking about the restoration of Israel and the bringing back of the northern tribes from their captivity back into the land of Canaan. This is why it says, they shall come again from the land of the enemy. And it says that thy children shall come again to their own border. And it refers to Ephraim again, being the grandson of Rachel. Rachel was not the mother of Judah, but she was the grandmother of Ephraim. And once again, Rachel is weeping for her children, the children of the house of Israel, the children associated with Ephraim. In context, this refers to the restoration of Israel. Clearly, this is the context of this verse, because we saw that Rachel was weeping, and it refers to refraining thy voice from weeping. Clearly, this is connected with that verse, but Matthew 2:18 is not considering it in context. So if we give both of these passages an honest look and actually consider the context for them, what is going on in the broader context of the passage, and what is that verse actually referring to? If we look at it that way, we can see that Matthew is not taking things entirely in context. That this passage in Hosea about calling his son out, this was not even a prophecy. It's talking about a past event, the Exodus. And it goes on to say that since the Exodus, Israel has been sacrificing and worshiping graven images. And so clearly this is not talking about what Matthew claims it to be, what Matthew takes out of context and claims to apply to these messianic issues. And the same thing is going on with the other verse about Rachel weeping for her children. The connection of Rachel and the children is completely different from how it is handled in Jeremiah. And clearly, we are to take the rest of those verses in Jeremiah in consideration of the context, because it refers back to that wording, the wording of Rachel weeping for her children. And it's not about Rachel weeping for her children in terms of the Bethlehem incident. It's talking about the dispersion of Israel, the dispersion of the northern tribes of Israel especially. So we should consider the fact that these quotes and these references that we see in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels, they are not always in context. Sometimes they are taken out of context. And this kind of is a clue to one of the key problems that we see with the New Testament. And of course, there are all kinds of explanations for this, saying that, well, maybe we should just consider it as dualistic and turn prophecies into something that we can take out of context, look at one small bit, and apply in a way they were not intended, and claim them to be dualistic in order to justify our previous beliefs. Is that really what was intended? Or should we be looking at it in context? Thanks for watching, and remember the commands. Shalom.